Something strange is happening in Hollywood, and nobody is saying it out loud. One moment, Harvey and Michael B. Jordan were the internet's favorite power couple. Luxury vacations, red carpets, and that perfect couple energy that social media couldn't stop obsessing over. And the next? Silence. Complete silence. No explanations. No clear closure. Just distance, and questions piling up everywhere. But now a new twist has entered the chat, and it's not coming from fans, not from blogs, but from whispers circulating across entertainment circles. Did Marjorie Harvey, Laurie's own mother, have more influence over this breakup than anyone realized? Sounds unbelievable, right? Or maybe, exactly the kind of Hollywood rumor that refuses to die. Because when you look closer, the timing gets interesting. The decisions get confusing. And the narrative, it starts to shift in ways that don't fully add up on the surface. Was this just a normal celebrity breakup that the internet overanalyzed? Or is there a deeper behind-the-scenes influence that quietly shaped everything we thought we understood? And here's the real question nobody can answer clearly. If family, fame, and Hollywood pressure collide behind closed doors, who actually controls the ending of a relationship? Stay with us, because what looks like a simple breakup on the surface might be a lot more complicated underneath. Hollywood relationships are never just relationships. They are public experiments running in real time, watched by millions of people who don't know the full story but still feel like they do. And few modern celebrity couples have been dissected, analyzed, and overread quite like Harvey and Michael B. Jordan. On the surface, it looked like a perfect match. A globally recognized actor at the peak of his career and a model of influencer whose entire public identity was built around elegance, exclusivity, and high-profile dating history. When they went public, the internet reacted instantly. It wasn't just their dating, it was "this is the couple." Luxury vacations, coordinated appearances, red carpet energy, and carefully curated silence when things got too personal. Everything about them looked controlled, intentional, and almost too polished to be accidental. But in celebrity culture, perfection usually becomes the first thing people start to question. Because the same audience that celebrates a relationship is often the same audience waiting for it to crack. And eventually, it did. The breakup didn't come with a dramatic announcement. There was no long explanation video, no emotional interview, no public confrontation. It was quieter than expected. Almost too quiet for a couple that had been so visible while together. One moment they were everywhere, and the next moment they were simply not. And that silence is exactly where the internet stepped in. Once there are no answers, people start building their own. At first, it was simple speculation. Busy schedules, career priorities, different life directions. The usual explanations that sound reasonable enough to settle public curiosity but vague enough to leave room for doubt. But over time, those simple explanations started to evolve into something more complicated online. Threads, commentary videos, and anonymous posts began painting a more layered picture. One where timing mattered more than people realized. One where influence, family dynamics, and behind-the-scenes conversations might have played a bigger role than anyone publicly admitted. And that is where one particular name started appearing more frequently in the background of discussions. Marjorie Harvey. Not as a confirmed participant in any event, and not as someone officially tied to any decision, but as a figure repeatedly mentioned in online theories trying to connect emotional dots that were never actually confirmed. The narrative slowly shifted from a breakup between two individuals to something larger, something allegedly shaped by external influence. But it is important to be clear here. What is circulating is not verified fact, it is interpretation, speculation, and internet storytelling filling in gaps left by silence. Still, in the world of celebrity culture, silence is never empty. It gets filled very quickly. To understand why people even began linking Marjorie Harvey to this conversation, you have to understand how deeply involved family presence can become in high-profile relationships. Harvey is not just a public figure on her own. She is also the daughter of Steve Harvey and closely associated with a family brand that is constantly in the spotlight. That means relationships are never just personal. They are observed, discussed, and sometimes even evaluated through a family lens. And when a relationship ends in that kind of environment, people don't just ask what happened between them. They start asking who around them might have influenced it. That shift in questioning is where things start to spiral into narrative territory rather than factual reporting. Because once the internet decides a story needs a hidden layer, it will create one. Old interviews start getting rewatched. Small comments get reinterpreted. Body language in public appearances gets analyzed frame by frame. Even casual jokes made in interviews are suddenly treated like coded messages. In this case, past statements about standards, independence, and relationship expectations were pulled into the conversation as if they were puzzle pieces meant to explain a much larger hidden picture. Michael B. Jordan, in contrast, was often framed online as the serious partner in the relationship narrative. Someone who was visibly invested, publicly affectionate, and reportedly very intentional about how he approached dating. But again, this is where perception starts replacing reality. Because public behavior is not the full story of private relationships, no matter how convincing it may look from the outside. Still, the internet loves contrast. And this particular story offered a very strong one. On one side, a man whose public image after the breakup continued to rise professionally, with major film success and increasing industry respect. On the other side, a woman whose personal life continued to remain highly discussed due to her dating history and media attention. That contrast alone became enough for people to start rewriting the past relationship through a new lens, one that suggests imbalance, regret, or external interference. Even when none of those things have been confirmed by the people involved. This is where the Marjorie Harvey angle starts to get amplified in online spaces. Not because there is evidence, but because narratives need direction. And when there is a gap between what happened and what people want to believe happened, the internet often fills it with a character who represents influence, control, or hidden decision-making. In this case, discussions began to loosely suggest that family dynamics might have played a role in how the relationship evolved and eventually ended. Again, these are not confirmed claims. They are part of a larger online pattern of attaching unseen forces to celebrity breakups. But once a narrative gains traction, it rarely stays contained. It spreads, mutates, and becomes more dramatic with each retelling. What started as a simple breakup discussion slowly transformed into a layered storyline involving timing, influence, career trajectories, and emotional interpretation. People began revisiting old moments with new assumptions. A smile in an interview became signs of discomfort. A private decision became external pressure. A silence became strategic distance. And through this lens, even neutral events started to feel loaded with meaning. However, what is often missing from these conversations is the most basic reality. None of these interpretations come from verified statements by the individuals involved. Everything exists in a space between observation and assumption. And that space is exactly where celebrity narratives become most unstable. Because once public perception takes over, the actual truth becomes less important than the version of the story that people find most engaging. And that's where things begin to get even more interesting. Because once a story shifts from simple breakup to layered interpretation, the next phase is always the same. The public stops asking what happened, and starts asking why it happened in a way that feels bigger than what was shown. In this case, the conversation didn't stay limited to just Lori Harvey and Michael B. Jordan anymore. It expanded. Slowly at first, then all at once. Social media discussions began pulling in names, relationships, and family dynamics that were never officially connected to any confirmed decision. And that is how Marjorie Harvey's name started appearing more frequently in speculative conversations. Not as a confirmed influence, but as a symbolic figure in the larger narrative people were trying to build. Because in celebrity culture, when silence exists, influence gets imagined. To understand why this happens, you have to understand how modern audiences consume relationships. They don't just watch them, they document them. Every interview, every public appearance, every caption becomes material for long-term analysis. And once a relationship ends, all of that content gets reprocessed in hindsight. The same moments that once felt romantic or harmless suddenly get reinterpreted as signs or warnings. That is exactly what started happening here. Old interviews involving Lori Harvey were resurfaced in clips and compilations. Statements about self-worth, independence, and relationship standards were being replayed with new commentary layered over them. In isolation, these were normal celebrity soundbites. But when placed into a breakup narrative, they began to feel like clues to something deeper, even when no such connection was ever confirmed by the individuals themselves. At the same time, Michael B. Jordan's post-breakup public image began evolving in a very visible way. His career continued to grow, his projects gained attention, and his industry reputation strengthened. And while this is normal for a successful actor, the internet rarely interprets success neutrally in the aftermath of a high-profile breakup. Instead, it gets turned into comparison material. One person moves on stronger, the other person becomes the subject of what went wrong discussions. That imbalance in narrative framing is what fuels most celebrity breakup analysis online. And this is where perception becomes more powerful than reality. Because reality, in most cases, is quiet, uneventful, and private. But perception is loud, emotional, and constantly evolving. It needs direction, it needs meaning, and most importantly, it needs characters that represent different sides of the story. That is why discussions started shifting from just the couple to the environment around them. Family, friends, management, and influence circles became part of the conversation, even without evidence tying them to any specific decision. Marjorie Harvey's name entered that space not because of confirmed actions, but because audiences were searching for structure in an otherwise simple situation. A breakup that had no public explanation became, in online spaces, a puzzle that needed hidden forces to explain it. And once that kind of thinking takes hold, it becomes less about facts and more about narrative satisfaction. But while the internet builds theories, real life continues without explanation. Neither Lori Harvey nor Michael B. Jordan publicly confirmed any of the layered interpretations being discussed online. There were no statements suggesting interference, no confirmations of external influence, and no verified reports supporting the idea of behind-the-scenes decision-making involving family members. What existed instead was silence, and that silence became the foundation for everything else. Silence is interesting in celebrity culture because it does not stop conversation. It accelerates it. When people don't get answers, they create them. And when they create them, they often structure those answers around the most emotionally engaging explanation available. In this case, that meant turning a private breakup into a multi-layered narrative involving influence, timing, and hidden dynamics. At the same time, another layer of discussion began forming around compatibility narratives. Online commentary started revisiting the idea of fit between the two individuals, often based on public persona rather than private reality. Lori Harvey's public identity has often been framed around independence and selective dating choices, while Michael B. Jordan's has been framed around intentionality and emotional investment. These simplified identity labels made it easy for audiences to assign meaning to the breakup, without needing actual confirmation from either side. But identity in public is not the same as reality in private. And this is where most online interpretations begin to drift away from accuracy. Because what the audience sees is a curated version of life. Appearances, interviews, red carpet moments, and social media posts are all edited fragments of a much larger and unseen reality. Yet when a relationship ends, those fragments are reassembled into a narrative that feels complete, even if it is not accurate. As discussions continued, some commentary began suggesting that external opinions may have played a role in shaping the relationship's direction. Not through confirmed statements, but through interpretation of family presence, past interviews, and public persona alignment. Once again, this is where speculation expands faster than facts. And it is important to note that in no verified account or official statement has any party confirmed such influence in a direct or factual way. However, the internet does not wait for confirmation when a story feels emotionally compelling. It builds versions of events that feel believable enough to circulate, especially when they involve recognizable figures and familiar relationship patterns. High-profile breakups often follow this exact cycle. Initial silence, followed by speculation, followed by narrative escalation, and eventually, a rewritten version of events that becomes more widely discussed than the original facts. In this case, The conversation also started reflecting broader themes about modern relationships in the public eye. Questions about timing, privacy, emotional investment, and public perception began overshadowing the actual individuals involved. People weren't just talking about Laurie and Michael anymore. They were talking about what their relationship represented in a cultural sense. Was it a case of two people at different stages of life? Was it a mismatch in expectations amplified by fame? Or was it simply a relationship that ended quietly and was later overanalyzed into something far more complex? These questions don't have confirmed answers, but they fuel engagement because they are open-ended. And open-ended stories are the most powerful ones online. Meanwhile, the absence of direct clarification from the individuals involved left a vacuum that continued to be filled with commentary, reaction videos, and speculative breakdowns. Each new video or post added another layer, even if it didn't introduce new facts. Over time, repetition made speculation feel more familiar, and familiarity often gets mistaken for truth in digital environments. That is how narratives evolve in real time. Not through evidence, but through accumulation of interpretation. By this stage, the story is no longer just about a breakup. It becomes about meaning-making. People start projecting lessons onto it, drawing conclusions about relationships, success, loyalty, timing, and influence. And in that process, real individuals become symbols in a larger discussion that extends far beyond their actual private lives. And that is where the conversation stands at this point. Not rooted in confirmed events, but in layers of interpretation built over time, shaped by silence, amplified by speculation, and sustained by public curiosity that refuses to settle for simple explanations. And as long as there are unanswered gaps, the narrative will continue to evolve. The narrative, once it reaches this stage, rarely stays about the original people anymore. It starts becoming something else entirely. A reflection of how audiences process fame, relationships, and silence in a world where every gap is treated like a hidden clue. And in this final stretch of the discussion, what becomes most visible is not evidence of any hidden coordination or confirmed interference, but the way a simple breakup story has been reshaped into a much larger cultural conversation. Because at its core, nothing about the confirmed facts has changed. Laurie Harvey and Michael B. Jordan were in a relationship, and they eventually ended it. That part is straightforward. Everything layered on top of it since then exists in the space of interpretation, speculation, and audience-driven storytelling. But once a narrative becomes viral, it stops belonging to the people in it. It starts belonging to the public imagination. And that is exactly what has happened here. As the conversation continued evolving online, the focus gradually shifted away from what happened between them to what the breakup represents now. Michael B. Jordan's continued professional success became part of the framing. Laurie Harvey's continued presence in fashion, media, and public attention became part of the framing. Even unrelated comments, old interviews, and past appearances were recontextualized through the lens of hindsight. This is how modern celebrity storytelling works. The timeline gets rewritten emotionally rather than factually. People look at where individuals are now and use that to reinterpret where they were then. But that method of storytelling, while engaging, is not always accurate. Because life does not move in narrative arcs the way internet discussions do. There is no confirmed evidence that any external figure, including Marjorie Harvey, played a secret or decisive role in ending the relationship. That idea exists only in speculative commentary, where audiences try to assign agency to unseen forces when the visible story feels incomplete. In reality, neither Laurie Harvey nor Michael B. Jordan has publicly supported any version of events involving outside intervention. What remains consistent instead is silence. And silence, in public life, is often misunderstood. To the public, silence feels suspicious. It feels like something is being hidden or protected. But in reality, silence is often just privacy, a boundary between personal experience and public consumption. In celebrity culture, however, that boundary is frequently ignored because audiences are conditioned to expect explanation for everything they observe. So when no explanation is provided, interpretation fills the gap. That is what transformed this breakup into a long-running online discussion rather than a closed chapter. Over time, Different communities online began attaching different meanings to the situation. Some framed it as a mismatch in timing and priorities. Others framed it as a case of two people growing in different directions under public pressure. And some pushed more dramatic interpretations involving influence and external decision-making, even without verifiable support. Each version of the story reflects less about the individuals involved and more about how audiences interpret celebrity relationships in general. Because in many ways, celebrity culture has trained audiences to expect hidden layers, to assume that what is visible is never the full story. And while that assumption is sometimes correct in broader entertainment contexts, it is not automatically true in every personal relationship that becomes public. In this case, there is no confirmed hidden layer that has been revealed through reliable sources or direct statements. There is only the gap between public knowledge and public curiosity. And that gap is where most viral narratives are born. As the discussion reached its peak, another shift occurred. The tone of commentary began to change. What initially started as curiosity slowly turned into judgment, comparison, and retrospective analysis. People began evaluating decisions made in the past based on outcomes visible in the present. That is a common pattern in online discourse, especially when one person appears to be thriving publicly after a breakup. But success after a breakup does not retroactively explain the breakup itself. It only changes how people choose to interpret it. This is why so many celebrity narratives become distorted over time. They are not static events. They are constantly re-edited by public perception. Each new achievement, interview, or appearance adds another layer of reinterpretation to something that is already complete in real life but unfinished in public conversation. In the background of all this, both individuals continued with their respective lives and careers. There were no public confirmations of ongoing conflict, no verified disputes, and no official statements supporting the idea of continued emotional or personal entanglement. The real-world timeline moved forward quietly, while the online timeline kept looping through analysis of the past. That disconnect is where most misinformation thrives, not necessarily through intentional deception, but through repetition and reinterpretation. When enough people repeat a speculative idea, it begins to feel familiar. And familiarity often gets mistaken for credibility in digital environments. But familiarity is not the same as fact. And repetition is not evidence. As the narrative expanded, it also began to reflect something larger about how audiences engage with celebrity relationships in general. There is a strong tendency to turn real people into symbolic figures representing emotional ideas. One becomes the focused success story, another becomes the independent reinvention story, and surrounding figures become supporting characters in a drama that never actually existed in that structured form. This is not unique to this situation. It happens across celebrity culture constantly. The human details get simplified. The complexity gets flattened. And what remains is a storyline that feels satisfying to consume but is not necessarily grounded in verified reality. That is why responsible interpretation matters in conversations like this. Because once speculation is treated as fact, it stops being commentary and starts becoming distortion. And in this case, the only grounded conclusion that can be drawn is simple. The relationship ended, and the rest of the narrative is built from public interpretation rather than confirmed information. Everything beyond that exists in the space between curiosity and imagination. And that space will always be filled, as long as audiences are more interested in meaning than in silence. But when you strip everything back, remove the assumptions, and ignore the narrative layering, what remains is far less dramatic than what the internet often creates. Two public figures who were in a relationship chose to end it, and continued their lives separately without publicly validating the theories built around them. And that contrast between reality and narrative is exactly what keeps stories like this alive long after the actual events have already ended. And that brings us to the point where the story stops being about confirmations and starts being about perception. Because whether you believe this was just a normal breakup that the internet overcooked, or you think there were deeper influences behind the scenes, one thing is undeniable. This situation shows how quickly public narratives can spiral beyond the facts. A relationship ends quietly, and suddenly it becomes a full-scale investigation online. Every interview gets replayed. Every old moment gets reinterpreted. every silence gets turned into meaning. And before you know it, a private chapter between two people becomes a global discussion where everyone is trying to fill in gaps that were never meant to be public in the first place. But here's the real question that remains unanswered in all of this. When the public starts building a story that no one involved has actually confirmed, at what point does it stop being about truth and start becoming entertainment? And more importantly, why are we so quick to believe the most dramatic version of events, even when the simplest explanation is often the most likely one? Because if you strip away the commentary, the theories, the speculation, and the noise, what you're left with is something much more ordinary. A relationship that had its time, reached its end, and moved on, without the need for hidden masterminds, secret influence, or dramatic behind-the-scenes control. But of course, ordinary stories don't go viral. And that's exactly why narratives like this keep coming back, reshaped every time someone adds a new layer of interpretation. So now the question is not just about Lori Harvey, Michael B. Jordan, or even Marjorie Harvey in the background of online theories. The real question is about how we, as an audience, consume these stories. Do we treat them as entertainment and speculation? Or do we start accepting them as reality without proof? Because once that line disappears, every celebrity moment becomes a mystery that never truly ends. And maybe that's the real story here. Not what happened between them, but what happens every time the internet decides it needs a deeper truth than the one actually given. Let us know what you think in the comments.